Welcome, animation fans, to another iAnimate podcast. I'm your host, Larry Vasquez, and joining me from recently attending E3 is Rick Arroyo. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm really thrilled about this podcast, and we got something really spectacular for you guys. So
yes, we have David Lam who will be joining us. He's an iAnimate instructor, as well as a cinematics animator over at Naughty Dog, who recently just finished up a huge game, Last of Us, and it's getting great reviews across the board. And so I'm really looking forward to talking with him about that and his role in that game.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
All right, fantastic. Well, let's pull David in here. Mr. Lam, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Larry. Thanks for having me here. It's an honor to be here.
Again, we appreciate your time. We know you've been very, very busy working on a game here. It looks like it's gotten some great reviews. So I know you've been busy working on it. So yeah, we do really appreciate you joining us today and taking some time with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, man. It's ironic that we're talking about the game today because it's shipping today. So it's a good time, I guess, because this is the first time I can really talk about the game. It's been kind of a secretive game for a while, and I can talk more about how it started, but we've been kind of kept, tight-lipped on this project for a while, and we've always been trying to PR and everything. Marketing's always told us to stay clear on the safe side and not really talk too much about the game. So it's ironic that it's like the first time I can really talk about it publicly or outside the company, so it's cool in that sense.
You heard it here first on iAnimate podcast. All right. Ship day, and we get an interview with David Lam. Well, tell you what, why don't you tell us a little bit about your role over there at Naughty Dog and on this game here, and just kind of how you came into the animation industry.
All right, so yeah, my name is David Lam. I'm lead cinematic animator at Naughty Dog on their recent project, Last of Us. So my roles were predominantly in charge of animation with cinematics. I was kind of co-lead. We had two leads on the project. That's how Naughty Dog's been doing their projects in the past. There's a lead cinematic animator that handles a lot of the front end of things like mocap directing, shoots, doing layout, assembling camera, and then usually toward the tail end with animation assets, any post work like working with lighting, environments, and so forth. We have another lead for that, and that was my role. So I was responsible for animation and getting assets in and making sure it was taken all the way to completion. With this latest project, it definitely was a big milestone for the team. So I didn't want to go off topic, but in terms of my way into the industry, I would say I think each one of us have always had a different way of getting into the industry. So it's unique to hear that, and it's cool. I didn't really start out in animation. I was actually a computer science major, and I went to a 4-year degree. So I kind of took a long way toward animation, and at some point I realized, comp sci is really not my thing. So I got into animation in grad school, and it kind of paved that way into animation. And I started out working in TV and so forth. And it's pretty brutal. It was back in 2003. I don't know if you guys knew about that time, but it was still games was still an up and coming industry. It was definitely like the PS2 time. So it was going this transition to PS3. So I was able to, fortunately get on a project that was pretty cool with Activision, and it was like PS2. Back then, like team sizes were still pretty small. It was like 30 to 40 people. So back then it was a little bit more intimate and personal. The scope of projects wasn't that crazy like nowadays. I don't know, Rick could probably chime in too, but going into next gen, it's gonna get even crazier. But yeah, I don't even want to with The Last of Us. We focused on PS3, and we're toward the end of our this PS3 cycle. So of course, you can imagine there is people working on the next gen, and it's funny. Like we just got off a tough project, and a few of us are just steered away from that because we don't know what that's going to entail and how much work. So it's interesting. I don't know. Rick has interesting comments about PS4 or next gen.
Yeah, well, I could say that. Okay, so there's really two sides of it, how I see it. There's the technology side, and there's being creative with that technology. And I'm really excited for both sides. Well, so we just came back from E3 for like 3-4 days. We've been at E3, got some great talks with some of the guys from Ubisoft and from other studios. And the technology, just talking example, let's say Watch Dogs. I just had a one-on-one demo with Colin Graham, and the tech of it is just phenomenal. These guys are really, these guys are really pushing it. And of course, Last of Us as well, but I'm just going to quickly talk about Last of Us. They've been really pushing the technology. The crowd system is unbelievable how how much small details they put into it and combining it together to make the world feel living. That's why they call it like the living city or the living world. And other things they're doing, it's like the hands in the pockets, the render, the number of animations and the quality of the animation. So you don't have that filter type animation that's kind of sliding or floaty. They really did great with that technology. And artistically, people can really push their vision of a game and really push the visuals and the story of a game. And every day we're getting closer to film in terms of presenting a great story and something that you can really watch and really be part of. And then there's also the part that we get to interact and be the hero, So I think the PS4 and Xbox One are bringing some amazing stuff. So I'm really excited. And I would be excited even for the indie industry, where small developers are now going to have easier access to create games and put on these platforms. So it's really impressive, and I think it's the right thing. So
yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. It's kind of like the tech and the artistry. And another thing, the way I see things too with working in games, it's expectations are rising like crazy. Like people expect more stuff on screen, and it's almost like production size is going to get even bigger. And sometimes doubling the team doesn't mean doubling the results. So it's like we have to kind of sit back, figure out how to work smarter. And that's a lot of the stuff we did on Last of Us. Like, we only have PS3. We've maxed it out on Uncharted and stuff. And so as a whole, as a general whole, each department had to really sit back and figure out, like, how do we maximize or squeeze out more juice in the PS3. So, and for cinematics, that's, I dealt mostly with cinematics. Toward the end, we really had to help out with in-game cinematics, but for the most part, I was dealing with story, narrative, and from that point of view, we really had to figure out, like, we have a pretty tight team. We're not a huge team. We had about 5 animators in-house dealing with cinematics, and then we worked with the external studio. And like, you don't have a huge team, and you're trying to make a 95-minute cinematic. We had 97 minutes, so we beat Uncharted by like 5 minutes. So it's pretty crazy, and so we have to really think about how we work. Sit back. We have the same structure, the same tools. It's like how can we work smarter? What can we utilize? What can we make more scripts? What can we automate? Just to help our life, because we're not a film company. Our first priority is a game, and we don't have that structure where we have like a big crew of animators or a big production staff. So I don't want to go off too much of a tangent, but Naughty Dog's great, but one thing the company really stressed or was very passionate about was that we weren't very production heavy, meaning we didn't have producers or people kind of wrangling stuff for us. We were our own producers, and that only works to a certain extent, So once you get to like PS2, that'll be fine, but once you got to PS3, things got bigger, right? So games got bigger and it got crazier. So now, for The Last of Us, we did have production, and it definitely helped us. And I think what I'm trying to get is for students too, or people listening, like it goes a long way to be organized or kind of work smart. We don't just do a straight up can animation all the time. We think of different workflows, different techniques we can do to like, utilize existing stuff or work on top of stuff. And that goes down to a whole nother beast, talking about workflow. So that was something we mandated as a whole, because we know we were a small team. We can't just pump out 90 minutes with just the few of us. At the most, we had 20 animators at once working on 90 minutes of scenes. So
that's phenomenal.
Yeah, it is. I want to say quickly something that what a lot of people might, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong, David. There's 2 cinematics. There's the in-game cinematics, and then there's the cinematic cinematic, which can be either a pre-render or just rendered with an engine. The 97 minutes, is that purely just cinematics, or does that include in-game cinematics?
No, that was just purely cinematics. Where
exactly.
It was sort of this quick-timey event, if you can call it that, and where you actually cut and you see it's more narrative-based and more about the story. And kind of to explain the differences for those who may not know, like, often when we're playing a game, we're always in this in-game moment where we're pushing the stick forward or whatnot. So the character is very much player control. But there's little moments that we want to feel very cinematic-like, but keep that player still in gameplay mode. And if done well, then we can try to make that player feel like we're in this mode, but we don't lose control. We regain control as soon as possible. So we make it very cinematic, almost movie-like, but you're still immersed as a player. So that's what we call in-game cinematics, or scripted events. And then there's these moments where we really just tell the story, and the trade-off for PS3 and what most studios are doing is that they're doing these like captured or pre-rendered content. So it takes you away from the game experience. It kind of sucks as a gamer, As an animator, it's really cool because we get to work on these coolly, rendered moments that mimic a lot of film. But as a gamer, it does take away the experience because you're cutting away, and then it's this sort of different quality, different look to the game. And that's one key area for The Last of Us that we were really focusing on, was that we try to tie in the game into the cinematics a lot more integrated and seamless. So we felt like it was still kind of part of gameplay. In terms of visuals, we try to match it as much as possible. So that was one of the key things that helps keep that player enticed, because if you're playing a game, and I think most people can kind of agree that once the cinematics comes on, if it's not very entertaining, people just want to skip right over it. So that's the drawback, As an animator, it's fun to work on, but you have to keep in mind it's not the focus. The focus is gameplay. So it's a trade-off, and it's a huge thing for games. So I don't want to go too far, but to talk about Last of Us, it's sort of where it came from. It definitely started very early on, and a lot of people did not know about it. So I started on Naughty Dog with Uncharted 2, and that was a very cool game. And I even knew it during it's not very common that when you're working on a game, you're like, oh my gosh, this is really badass during production. You tend to be, frustrated. I don't know, Rick can probably chime in, like, this sucks, or this is not going the way it should be. But something with Uncharted 2, it's like you could tell right away. I came in, given it's a sequel, we can talk about that later too, like working on a sequel versus like original IP like The Last of Us. But like coming into Uncharted 2, it was very, very cool. Like from right off the bat, you got this very sense of like, this is going to be a good game. Like, you have something special. So, once I got on that project, it was just an awesome experience. And it was after that project where the game director, Bruce Straley, and the co-lead designer, Neil Druckmann, the company wanted to sort of explore a way. They knew they were going to work on Uncharted 3, of course, given the success of it. But they wanted to try something different. And, a lot of fans have suggested Jackson Dexter, and that's what people really know, how Naughty Dog started out. But they knew that, with our fans, with Jackson Dexter, that, was in the 90s and then Uncharted, our audience was getting more mature. So we knew that we couldn't really go that route anymore. We couldn't go into that, cartoony kind of snappy type of characters like that mimics that. So we knew we had to sort of cater to a more mature adult audience, if you can say. And Uncharted was really cool, and it was very fun. It was more Hollywood, set pieces and over the top. So they wanted to go a different route. And one thing that really inspired them, and you may or not have seen it, but one big source of inspiration was this BBC video where it was like these ants that were getting infected by this fungal infection called cordyceps or something like that. So it was pretty gnarly, where like this is real life, where these ants are getting infected and it takes over their brain, and they go back to their colony and they like infect everyone else. So the idea was like, what happens if that was an infection for mankind? So that was a cool inspiration to jumpstart the project, and something that could get really very dirty, very grounded, a bit dark in that sense. And the other idea was that what if they wanted to explore relationships with our hero characters, and one area that wasn't very proven or done so much in games was to have this a father-daughter relationship. It was between two strangers, so you have like this 14-year-old kind of rebellious girl, and then you have this 40-year-old man that's very hardened, who suffered a lot. So they're very contrasting characters. So to develop that kind of relationship is pretty daunting. So that's kind of how the game started, and it was really cool. It was very kept under secret for a long time. So that's why I say like it's funny that we're talking about it today, because it's like the first time we can really openly speak about it. So so that was under wraps when Uncharted 3 was starting. So that's the first time the company went 2 projects, and it's for those who don't know, like games is very iterative. It's the cycles are a lot longer than a film. Like when you're working on original IP, it could take anywhere from like 3 to like 8 years or something, like Duke Nukem or something. It's tough to balance a multi-team company. So it's pretty tough. We were working on Uncharted 3 and The Last of Us, and as soon as Uncharted 3 wrapped up, The Last of Us was really, starting to really move forward. Actually, sorry, it was after Uncharted 2 that The Last of Us was starting to move forward with Uncharted 3. And at an early stage, I was asked to come on board, and I was the second animator on. And so it's really cool. I got to be really involved at an early stage with the project. This was nearly like 4 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago. Yeah, to see it like come from there, that's pretty cool. So like for games, it's much more invested, you can say. I don't know about. I mean, I'm sure the same thing with the with first title films. Like they do spend a lot of time. But this one was like a 4-year project, so you feel like it's almost like you're really tied into this. Like it's almost like your baby. So I got involved pretty early, and that was great. I was able to previs. I was able to previs the game and how it felt in terms of gameplay, and mostly on combat stuff. So that was really utilizing my skill set. A lot of my background is in combat and so forth. So that was cool. I really digged it.
What kind of combat? You are like martial arts or?
Yeah, I grew up a lot on. So long story short, I always bring it up to friends and they laugh. Like I grew up I was a really fat, chubby kid growing up, and I was like constantly eating as a fat kid, and I always got picked on. So I was like, man, I got to do something as a kid, and I was like 12 years old, and I was like, man, I got to defend myself. I don't want to get picked on all the time. So I started picking. Yeah, I picked up martial arts, and I was doing kung fu a lot.
Very cool.
Just so that I don't get beat up at school. So that little did I know at the time, it really paved the way for like animation, because for a lot of students, people are really into animation because of cartoons and so forth. But if you can draw like any experiences from your past childhood, whether it's like any sports, football, soccer, it's all about like physics, your body, and the way you torque your body. That's huge. So I draw a lot of my experiences from those early childhood, and I was like, man, and I didn't think about it when I was animating. I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, all this kung fu stuff really helps. Like, it ties in so much when I was doing action stuff. I didn't really, put one-to-one together until like I was really sitting down and figure out like how this character like swings a sword and whatnot. So that really helped. So that was cool. And when I did combat for The Last of Us, it was very melee centric, very grounded. So that's where the game is that was the direction of the game very early on. It was like grounded, really gritty, dirty, like really, really brutal, if you can think about it that sense. Like, Uncharted, it was more kind of like action flick where you can punch a guy and you knock him out. Uncharted, you would like punch a guy and then grab him by the throat and really suffocate him until he doesn't move anymore. So it was a pretty violent game. So that was something that was stuck at the very beginning of the game. Like, we wanted to separate from Uncharted that way.
So you guys were working on Uncharted 3 and Last of Us roughly about the same time.
Yeah, and then at some point, I know what you're going to say. At some point, I sort of left the company and then came back just for personal reasons. I came back to work on Uncharted just to really help them out. They were really in a tight crunch, and it was awesome because I really am close to Drake. I really like that character and the game itself, so I was very happy to be on Uncharted. So I went back onto Uncharted 3 and helped them with. And my roles on Uncharted 2 and 3 were in-game cinematics. So I didn't work on any cinematics or facial stuff at the time. I was focusing more on those cinematics moments that tie into gameplay, more action stuff. So like Drake would get, maybe a helicopter would like shoot a wall or launch a missile, and then Drake has to react. So it's one of those like cinematic, very one-off situations where you feel like you're like almost like movie-like. So after Uncharted 3, that's when I got back onto The Last of Us, and at that point I wanted. I hear a lot from our students and so forth, and people are very, very inspired to work with cinematics and so forth. And I'll tell you, like there is pros and cons of doing cinematics and in-game cinematics, and People think cinematics is much better, and I don't agree. It's very much, it's on the same playing field. You're still animating. It's still, IGCs is a different beast, cinematics is a different beast, and they each have their fun value. And in-game cinematics is very much tied into gameplay, how the player feels. You still need response, and it's cool because you're controlling this character. Cinematics is more like film-like, and I can understand why people like cinematics, but and sometimes in-game gets kind of looked down upon, and I don't agree. They're both still animating, and you have your challenges in both fields. So
one of the things that is kind of interesting that you just mentioned here in regards to the in-game animation is that you're not just doing, here's a walk cycle, and you just do a walk cycle. You're doing a walk cycle for that specific character to give that character just that character, a feel for this particular character that you're controlling. So it's not just a vanilla walk cycle. Just something that you kind of mentioned just kind of really caught me on that, is that it's still very much, it seems like, in regards to cinematics or film, where you're trying to get into this character, so to speak, right?
Yeah, exactly.
For that, what this character
for
particularly would do.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I think I break it down to, for those like who are new to the industry or to animation. So there's in-game, where it's like really it's player control. You have your walks, your runs, your jumps, and so on. We still want to make the best performance, make sure the audience, the player, whoever's seeing the character on screen really relate and believe in that character. And then you have an interactive game cinematics, or So there, I really messed up there. Interactive cinematics is where it's a bigger performance, where like David Lam says, like the character is being shot out of a plane, and there's this big event, and you want the player to really feel this performance and be part of the performance, but it's a big performance which you get to interact with. And then you have the cinematic, is you're just watching a performance. So as a game animator, there's a lot of value in doing like in-game stuff and saying, look, I connected all these small animations, put them together, and I made a performance with multiple small animations together. And then there's a huge reward when you do an interactive cinematics, where there's multiple outcomes and multiple possibilities, and the player is like so into this performance, and he unbelieves that he's like, I can't imagine how they did this, that I'm flying out of a plane and I'm going to catch this box and whatnot, but they're in control, they're living it. So the player gets excited, he gets scared, they're like, I don't want to die. When you watch a cinematic or a film, you worry about the character, but you're not as attached. And what we're doing now, like we said earlier, expectations are getting higher. Naughty Dog is a fantastic studio. They give ownership to the animators. If you watch some of these cinematics or these trailers, and you're going to be blown away with the quality and the performance and the depth that we go into with our characters. A lot of people are stuck in like the 80s and 90s on games. We're past that. We are really pushing it, and that's something that we teach in our class. And like David says, make people aware of that. There's so much that we do in games. It's not just a walk cycle. There's way more. We deal with creatures and monsters that don't even exist, and animals, and these cinematics, and it's just fantastic. So
yeah, you hit it right on the spot, Rick. Yeah. And one thing for The Last of Us, I wasn't part of gameplay, so I can't speak too much detail, but I know from The Last of Us what really pushed gameplay was that the game was very much system heavy. There's a lot more system, meaning Joel, our main character, is in a lot of different types of set of animations, whether he's behind cover, he's in stealth, or he's in combat situations. So it's very more systems heavy. Another thing, the second thing to add to it is that we have a lot more movesets, meaning we have Joe walking, but we have so many types of walk. Joe could be, walking in a tense situation. He'd be walking across a plank. And on top of all that stuff, he could hold a number of weapons. So we had a lot of different types of personality that we gave to our main character. So James Martincheck dealt with the hero character, and it's funny when I go up to him and I was like, dude, how many movesets are you doing? He goes, it's endless. But it's challenging because he has to embrace so many types of walks and so forth. But at the end result, the payoff is huge because as a company, we're playing this game, and it's just astonishing how unique Joe is in a lot of different scenarios in the game. Whether you're on top of a building, high ground, or it's windy, so Joe might be a little bit more tense. It's very, very detail oriented, and it shows. It's this huge payoff when you see your character interact differently, per environment. So it's pretty cool in that sense.
Now, before our interview here, I checked out IGN, and they had some crazy great reviews for you guys on this project here. They gave you guys a 10 out of 10, which is, according to them, a masterpiece. And then in regards to this game as well, it said case study on how games can immerse you, tell a fascinating story, and make you really care about its characters. Now, as a studio, because you guys are saying, you mentioned that you guys are playing this game and whatnot, and I don't mean this in a prideful way, but does that surprise you that you guys got this solid of ratings, or were you guys going, no, we felt like this is where we were at, or how did you guys feel as a studio?
It's funny you bring that up because games is very iterative, so this is original IP, so early on it was very tough. It was one of those massive undertakings where we knew what we knew what we wanted to do, but it was a lot of work to get there. It was only until probably the last few months that I'm sure most game developers know, people tend to stick to this idea that the game will come together at the end because of pressure, because of crunch. But yeah, we really did come together at the end, and toward the last few months, the game really developed, and it was toward that end where we all kind of just knew what we're given the track record of the company with the Uncharted series, we knew that we could trust our management and higher ups and what they're doing. It was a matter of just guarding the strength and the time and your heart to kind of get that last push in. So we knew during that push it was worth that push, and that's the hard part. If you're pushing on a project and you're not too confident, that's really tough. You start to kind of lose morale, but we knew we had something special. And then toward the end, once we got everything in place, we knew we had something very cool in hand. So once we saw the reviews, we were really happy. There is always this doubt. It's like anything you're working on.
Right.
You're not sure how it's going to be received. But it was pretty nerve-wracking. I remember everyone's kind of waiting on that Wednesday. It was last Wednesday, and everyone's just waiting. And, we, of course, there's haters and so forth. So we're like, oh man, that guy gave us not to sound cocky, really. Oh, that guy gave us an 8 out of 10 or something. But we knew we had something cool because we knew the amount of sweat, tears, and blood and sacrifice that went into it. So.
Okay, I got another question here because this kind of throws me, not being in the games realm as much. You said that this game has been in development for how many years?
2009, 2010.
Okay,
yeah.
So we're looking at 4 or 5 years here, and you said it comes together at the last couple of months. How does that work?
Magic. Yes. Do we spread sprinkles of magic and it happens?
I mean, what happened in the last couple of months that pulls it together? I mean,
I think a better way to approach it is like in film or TV, you have your animatics and you kind of flush those out, right? So you storyboard stuff, you produce that time animatic or whatnot, and you can kind of see as a whole. For games, it's a lot more iterative. You really depend on people's reactions and so forth. And it takes a long time to figure out exactly what you want. It's an original IP. Original IPs take a long time. And, you rely on focus testing, play testing, and it's this sort of, you have a sort of, you can't see me, but I have my hands wide open. It's like a funnel where you have this wide open plate of ideas that you can explore. And at some point you realize only certain ideas are going to work. So you start to funnel what's going to work and what's fun. And it's really tough when you're making a game. It's all about the fun value or how it plays out. And I know it's crazy. I mean, Rick looks like he's sick. So.
I'm going to say this. So there's 2 weeks. Well, there's ways of making games, but there are people that make games for themselves and they think the audience is going to like it because they're like, they're really hardcore into one element of the game and they make a game for themselves and most of the time they don't succeed. And then there's like Naughty Dog that they make a game that they truly believe in, but they know their audience. And that's something that David said early on is that, you need to know your audience, really understand how to connect with them and what they want to experience, what they want to live, what they want to be part of. And I think and that's what IGN and even at E3, it's like every time you play a Naughty Dog game, you're like, wow, they just do it so well. How can I do this? How can I just do this? Some studios are like, they did it so well. How can I top them? But when you talk about Naughty Dog, you're like, how did they do this? I just want to be just at the same level, because that is a high level. That is amazing, and they do such a great job. But yeah, I mean, know your audience, and that I think that is a key element when you're making a game. Don't make a game just for yourself. If you make a game for yourself, put your passion into it, but realize that it's the audience that are going to be buying in player games, and those are the guys that you want to get excited, because naturally you'll be excited because you'd say, "Wow, I did a great job. We did a great job. Everyone's high fiving." So I think that's something that's really important is know your audience, and Naughty Dog, Drake, it was an amazing game, and that audience will naturally follow Naughty Dog. Is really know your audience. I think that's really important.
Yeah, Rick hit the spot, and even given that we knew our audience, at the same time with any game, it's always the case where you'll develop something and you think it's fun, you try it out, and sometimes it doesn't get the same reaction that you expected. And it's at that point as a game developer, do you scrap that idea or do you try to fix around it? And with Naughty Dog, the way we are structured, it's like people are bold enough just to say we're going to scrap it and then let's do something different, and it's tough, and then it's tough as an artist because you get a little demoralized because you have to redo stuff, and and that's what I stress in class. Like, there's often times where you do something cool, but you have to work differently because things could get scrapped. And I'm sure the same thing in film, like there's sequences that could get scrapped and whatnot. It happens more in games, so it's something you have to embrace, acknowledge. And at our company, we're confident enough to scrap something if it's not working and then change things up. So there's things that we saw as cool, but then we're not afraid to go even further. And so that means you have to bring people, you have to have followers to trust you. It's like, hey man, we're gonna change the way you did this whole set of animations because we wanted to make it look cooler. So, or to enhance what you just did. So it's a little frustrating, but then you're like, crap, okay, I've done this for the 5th time, so I got to do it a 6th time. But given the track record, we know that there is a reason why we're doing this stuff, and we kind of believe in that, So there is a lot of ups and downs in a project, in a game development.
People don't realize that you could work on you could be working on a cover almost for a full year, and then they were like, you know what, let's change it. Or you could be working on a new system, like say you have cover and there's like a unique one-on-one combat within cover, and towards the end, the system can complete, but it's not right for the game or for the story, and they just might remove it. It can be done. They remove it because we're always aiming for that quality relationship with the audience, making sure they're really immersed into it. So, I mean, it can be frustrating at times. I mean, like I had systems like I'm really happy with what the guys are doing, but the call is it's just not right for the game. So it's like 8 months work, it's gone.
Pull the plug,
it's literally just unplug it. It's there. It's there. You could put it back in and it'll work fine, but it's just literally unplugged and sitting on the shelf for another game or something.
Just seeing Larry's reaction, like doing something for the 6th time, like, oh crap. I saw your reaction, like, oh man.
Player experience is key. It's really, I mean, if you can get the player experience and they're really, you get that connection, then that is the ultimate goal, the gameplay. And then of course making sure that gameplay and the story ties in, it just makes that foundation of the game so solid. So we deal with a lot of different things. We deal with stories, we deal with gameplay, and then we deal with technology, and then we make sure that foundation is solid. And when you understand that, then you can definitely be successful, like David Lam.
One thing Naughty Dog too does, and they're confident in one approach that the company has, that they're not afraid to aim high. So oftentimes we aim as high as we can. And like Rick said, there could be technical challenges, and that's up to our programmers, who are like the most badass programmers, I think, in the gaming industry, where they will try to achieve those technical challenges. So we'll try to aim as high as possible and not limit ourselves. But of course, toward the end, things get hectic, and you might have to prioritize, ditch some stuff or make some compromises because of memory and so forth. So we try to aim as high as possible and then figure out how to make it achievable is the first thing, and then make it practical, meaning it'll run in real time, 30 frames per second and so forth. because that's always the name of the game, making stuff hold up. One thing that's, for people to see like trailers and tech demos, it's those things are great, but they're not practical. You only see those kind of scenarios in an ideal situation, but once you throw it into real gameplay, it doesn't really, can't hold up. So we do those things too, but we try to aim as high as possible. So that's kind of what, that's the philosophy. Like, this is Naughty Dog, let's do it. And like, okay, I don't know what that means, but let's try to do
it. Just going for it, huh?
Yeah. Reach for the star and skip the moon. That's what I say.
You have a lot of good programmers there. I'm just curious, does your computer science degree come in to play at all with what you do? Any scripts or anything like that you've messed with?
Yeah, I mentioned this like to students that for the games class. The more that you can, the thing that really differentiates animators in film versus games is that we often have to work with a number of type of people, meaning we work with the number of type of breeds of people, meaning we work with designers, we work with programmers, and then we work with fellow artists who think just like us. But unfortunately, designers think a different way, and programmers think very differently than us. So there are a lot about practicality, it's very step-by-step sort of fashion, like they think about if and then. So as with my background, I don't code or script, it's something I stay away from, but I can talk the language and it helps me communicate with the programmer. You'll find it like when you're working games, you're trying to talk to programmers and they don't even talk the same language. You're like, dude, just do it this way. And but they think about how to do it. We're just thinking high level, like what makes it look great. So I can kind of bridge that gap. It helps, especially if people don't have that technical background. On the cinematics team, we had a mix of like game guys and more film guys, and they didn't have that technical background. So it's good to kind of get them up to speed and kind of explain some terminology and how that works, because it's that gap. And whatever, even we're dealing with 3D, we're dealing with computers, so you have to kind of embrace the technical side of everything. You can't just be a straight up visual guy and that's it. You have to learn the limitations, whether you're an art director or or whatnot. So it's those that can kind of embrace the technical side. And that's Naughty Dog is very technical in that sense, where we hire designers that don't just design and so forth. They have to script too. So it's this sort of you have to be able to implement or kind of walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I got a question here from our Facebook page, and I want to encourage all of our listeners, if you join our Facebook, even posting comments back on our podcast here, we'd love to hear some feedback from you, and this will be actually, I think, a really cool way of getting some interaction from you guys. So this one here is from Keith Glass. I believe this is the same Keith Glass, who's one of our graduates on the feature side, and he said, I keep hearing about the atmosphere of The Last of Us is so in-depth, immersive, and impressive. I would like to hear how the animation helped to make that atmosphere and the experience so engaging and engrossing for the player.
That's a good question. I think one thing that really came about from the very beginning is that we wanted to separate ourselves from Uncharted. Uncharted was great, and it did things more like it's more style. The animation was stylized in terms of facial, and just the overall theme was more Hollywood, more blockbuster type moments. So early on, The Last of Us was more. It was the same in terms of a very heavy on character-driven game, more narrative, meaning story is going to really tie into gameplay, but we wanted a different approach. The game was going to be more grounded, more gritty, more realistic and violent. At the same time, for our emotions and for our characters, there was a mandate for realism. In other words, like subtle performances. We didn't want to go over the top, and I think that's one area that we really mandated. It's not just animation. That's the key thing. I think it was a mandate for the entire team, starting from character designs to modeling to rigging and so forth. With modeling, we try to keep things as realistic as possible. We didn't want to go too realism because you'll get into that uncanny valley, of course. But they try to keep proportions very intact, very consistent among the characters. And rigging, and the reason I bring this up because I was closer. I very much had input on the character models and the rigging was very close. And rigging was very, things were done very more subtle. It's in I don't want to give the impression that we did a different pipeline or different workflow. It is the same pipeline from Uncharted. We took the pipeline and the tools, and we just sort of catered to what we were doing, and just added to it. So we added a few additional tools, but the underlying pipeline was still Uncharted. We knew that it was a mandate for subtle realism, and that really was a big thing. And people think about it's just facial, but it's everything. Even down to effects. We wanted it to be as realistic as possible, getting blood, dirt on our characters, on the textures, and it took a really big group effort to stick to that. And I was involved in a lot of different, hats, you can say, caps or whatnot, and that was cool. I got to really play a number of roles without ever really asking for it. I was just forced to be in these situations, which was cool. It was out of my comfort zone, but I think, hey, sometimes you just have to do what you have to do, right? A couple things too that really help push us. And I think for games, it's a tough thing. And Rick brought this up really well. There's game design and then there's story. And we really emphasize story. So it's almost like this 50-50 thing. They have to work together. They have to progress at the same level. You can't go too far with game design and then story gets lacking. And then you have this really big disconnect between the two. So one thing that was awesome for us that was different from Uncharted is that we were able to get the script early on. We were able to get the story in front of us and to work on cinematics at an early stage. So we were working side by side with game design. And at some points we were actually ahead of game design, and we like to use the word we're front-loading work. That was cool because we were able to sort of dictate the game as well a little bit because of cinematics, storytelling. But that has its disadvantages because you put the game design at a tough spot because you're limiting them. So it's this very tricky feel that once you get into games, those two they're very interrelated, and there's a huge relationship between design and story. So early on we were given the story, and it made us more conscious of production. And me and Sean and Sky was the other cinematic lead, and I mean, I hate to admit it, we were a little bit OCD, so we had this production sort of mindset where, we didn't have any production. We had a production coordinator, but she couldn't help it. She was handling things from a project-wide level, and so we were able to set up our quotas and really divvy up work and schedule and kind of predict ahead of time. What happens in games, it gets so hectic, you're just reacting to the situation, we'll see how much we can get in. We were able to kind of predict and hit our quotas and know exactly what we're doing and how much work we get done. So for a lot of our cinematics, the guys were doing 10 seconds a week, and that was the quota. So with that said, we were able to really push our scenes, get a very consistent look to our game. And that's a tough thing with games. You'll see, it's not to bag on animation in games, but because it's just so iterative, it's hard to plan ahead. You can see that the quality across the game could suffer. There's some moments are really looking cool, and some moments are you're kind of cringing a little bit because there wasn't enough time. We were very fortunate to be very consistent with the quality of our look, the game. And that really helped lighting a lot too. So lighting played a key role. They were able to iterate, and the huge thing is that they were able to tie in the in-game lighting to cinematic lighting. So we were able to, tie that and make it really consistent, and you feel like you're not really, there's no question and doubt. It's the same. It's the same look, it's the same content, and you're branching from gameplay to cinematic back to gameplay. And we felt that time that we had gave us that time to make it feel more polished, more integrated. And the same thing goes for working on in-game cinematics or in-game moments to tie into cinematics. We're able to tie that stuff in so much more, and it's not something you'll that's the funny thing. It's like visual effects. It's not something you'll notice. That's the funny thing. If you notice visual effects, then that means they did a bad job, right? Yeah. So if you notice any inconsistencies, then we did a bad job. But if you don't, then no one ever notices, and that was the key thing.
So basically, keeping on time and, like you said, having that ownership of getting that quota allowed some of these other departments to be able to do their job well.
Yeah, and integrating those.
Yeah,
going from gameplay to cinematic gameplay. So that it's people probably don't think that's an important thing, but it's a huge thing. It keeps the atmosphere, keeps the player immersed in it. We're not cutting away. They're still drawing the player in. They really want to watch this, and as soon as they watch that, like, wow, what do I do next? And it keeps that player tied into gameplay as long as possible.
So you were talking about you got the script early. So because you had the script early, how did you determine the choices, how Joe and Eli would interact? Like, was that early on, or was that during production that you chose that relationship?
Yeah, so very early on, Neil was very hands-on with animation. Neil was the creative director. He wrote the story, and we used Ashley Johnson as our actress and then Troy Baker as the actor. So they were given a lot of direction, and we had to be very specific on facial performance. And a lot of those moments sort of, in cinematics kind of dictated what gameplay would be like. So you brought up a good question too. Like, I mentioned that the game was very heavy in systems with Joel, and the same thing with Ellie. Like, we wanted to keep Ellie alive. If Ellie was annoyed in a cinematic, we wanted her annoyed in the gameplay as well. So we had a lot of gesture systems where she would continue to be annoyed outside of the cinematic. Like, she would be pissed off at Joel, or like, she gives the middle finger to Joel. So we wanted to keep that very tied in. So one of the animators, Allie, she did a really good job she was in charge of Ellie, and we were able to put those gestures in Ellie during gameplay. So it really helps tie those characters in, from gameplay to cinematic back to gameplay.
Did you guys do a lot of dailies for the cinematics and in-game cinematics?
For cinematics, we were very much I have some film background, and Sean, this guy, is the co-lead, and he's very much film background. So this was his first game production, and along with the other crew like Keith and Tao, the other animators, they were very much film background. So we were able to bring those sort of same workflow. So we were doing dailies. We requested different tools to bring those film sort of techniques, you can say. It's nothing new, but it was great to kind of come together as a team and use the same proven practices that we had in the past. So, and that was cool, and that kind of leads to another topic that, to answer the question. Like, we kind of had a new team. Like, we had a different mindset. The guys wanted a new team because we wanted a different take on the game. We didn't want to resemble Uncharted, and that's the key thing. Like, when you're going two teams, you don't want the same. You don't want your product to mimic each other. So, a good way was that we brought in a new team. And that has its challenges as well, but with the new team, we had a different approach, and it's not to say it was better or whatnot than Uncharted. It was just different. And the key thing was that we brought the Uncharted guys on too, and it was awesome because they helped out and very proactive and gave a lot of input. So we were able to utilize them with their background, with the pipeline and so forth, and their skill set, and with the new team. And I think that really helped creating that mood and atmosphere, because we had like a brand new, more of a film team, and I was more sort of this transitional guy and I think that's how I got my position, because I could handle the technical side and the animation side, because with games it is technically challenging. So to merge those two types of people, like the Uncharted team and our team, was cool, and that really helped us. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, because I brought one from Adam Bradford, who says, what new challenges did you face, and how was it different from the Uncharted games? And then how did they improve the animation system from their previous games, etc.? Kind of what you're going into there, but can you maybe elaborate? What were some of the new challenges from the Uncharted games to this Last of Us?
Yeah, the big challenge was, I think, like any other animator can say, it was that the game was a lot more, our creative director was a lot more hands-on, so he wanted exactly what he wanted, and that's great, and it felt more like a film. And that's, in games we tend to have a little bit more freedom, but for this it felt more like a film. So that is a little bit challenging for some, but I think it worked in its favor. The second thing was that we wanted to be uber realistic, like matching exactly the performances of our actors and actresses. So it's not to say we're doing one-to-one, but we had to stick to realism as much as possible. So we're sticking to the live action ref as much as we can as an inspiration, as a start. And then there's moments where we can enhance it if we need to, or there's often times where the performance you get on stage doesn't necessarily translate, and you get back and you see it in an edit and you're like, crap. So we were able to, we stuck to performance as much as possible, but as animators, we had that freedom to kind of go back and alter performances. So that was the hard part. We were really sticking close as possible. But there's pros and cons because it limits you, but at the same time, it makes the product very tight. So we knew we were sticking as close as possible as Ellie and Joel. And a lot of us too were just really hard on each other. So I think that was a key thing. We're really tough on each other. It's tough because it's a new team, so there's a lot of challenges because you're trying to learn from each other and who you are and how you guys work. And given that we were able to start so early, we figured out our nicks and crannies, like our weaknesses and strengths. And I know like he just gets pissed off, just let him get pissed off, and then calm down. And we knew each other at a certain point. And once production really got heavy, we were a tight team, meaning like we were very close. And I think that always helps. And I think when you're working with, if it's a contract-based job, you're bringing people on together, and they're just there to like hit full steam, full production. But because we were there pre-pro, I think we developed this relationship early on, so that helped as a whole. And quickly too, like it's weird, but like in terms of the rigs, I know that's probably a big question too. Like we used the same rigs, we didn't really change too much. I think the main point was, and Judd and Tyler were the two character TDs. I think the main thing was from an artistic standpoint. We just changed the way we deformed the face and the way we hit certain poses. We still relied on the same facial rig, and the way Naughty Dog has done it from the past is it's very much like a bone-based system, bone-posed setup where the TDs will create the shape with bones, and then those are the shapes that we can hit in animation. So they did a really great job creating those poses. And I would say, one extra thing that we did different was that they used blend shapes to correct some poses. So it would give us that little more realism. So when Ellie smiles, we're pushing her cheeks and so forth, and getting, when she squints, we're getting the crow's feet. And so we were paying attention to a lot more detailed stuff. So I think that's what really helped us in the long run. And I was able to be, those guys are uber cool. They're very cool. And I was able to give my input at an early stage. So I was a lot more involved with rigging than I've ever been before. So, and I think it pays off because once, we developed this relationship, and it was really cool. So nothing like out of the box, like super, technically advanced that we did. I think it was just having the right players in the right spot, like people's personalities, and just really pushing the art side of things. And I think given, this is the end of the PS3, we can only do so much more, So it's all about like what we can push as an artist and the content.
Now, can you describe basically the process? Because you mentioned you going as close to realism. How much did performance capture play a factor? How much did motion capture play a factor? And then how much did keyframe play a factor in what you were doing for this project?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a great question.
And I'm sure it's a huge topic. So the way we work is from Uncharted till The Last of Us, we've always mocap the body. So we'll have our actors and actresses, and they'll be in their suit. So we motion capture the body performance. And then we've always, for Uncharted, it made sense. They keyframe the face because the face was a little bit more stylized. It wasn't entirely realistic. For The Last of Us, it was the same process. The body was mocapped and the face was keyframed. So, if we're going for realism in the face, why not do the facial mocap too? And I wasn't part of the early on process, but it was really hard to manipulate facial at the time. We didn't have the tech per se in-house or the people, the resources. So it would have been, I think, more cost-effective to keyframe, and it gave us a little bit more freedom in case we needed to change stuff. So kind of leading to your question is, in the industry, whether it's like VFX, animation, or games, like there's this whole mystery about mocap and how do we use it. And it's still kind of a mystery. Each company uses it differently. I'm sure Rick uses it differently. Lico uses it differently. And, in-game uses it differently. And then for cinematics, we tend to stick with a lot of the mocap to get that subtlety. And that's what we use mocap for. I tell students that don't be afraid of mocap. It's a tool there, and it's not going away because it does such a good job. It captures realism, We can't animate that stuff, or, you could be, but it'll take you so much time to animate. But it leaves room for other areas of animation, meaning like maybe gravity-defying moments where you're jumping out of a plane, or it leaves room to work on action pieces. But mocap is a tricky thing because you want to keep the subtleties, and for the most part, what you get on stage is you're gonna stick with. But sometimes when you get back to your computer and you're working and you have the edits, some of that performance, like I said, is not exactly what you want. So it's at that point where you decide, do I re-mocap this whole thing or do I change it in animation? So those are moments where you can enhance a mocap performance, and it's tough because you don't want to break the mocap, you want to enhance it. And I tell people, like, we just want to push that performance. So it's tricky. It's a skill set. And ultimately, sometimes it's the worst case scenario is you have to like butcher it or change it completely because the director doesn't want it, and that's really hard. And it's because you're going from this super realistic motion and you're starting to keyframe it, and you can quickly tell where it gets keyframey. And so that's a challenge itself. So when you see like in visual effects, it's compromised. It's based on whether the actor is available to reshoot the mocap, or is it better off if you have a strong animator, just let him keyframe it. So there's often a time where we have to change performances, or the actor didn't really do a cool jump. He didn't do really a heroic jump. You're like, oh, you start to cringe. That's the payoff. Like, I can animate that, and if you can prove yourself worthy to your higher ups or your director, then he'll give you that freedom. So it's funny because no one's if you did it right, again, you won't see it. Like, people just think it's pure mocap, and that's the cool thing. That's not mocap. That's keyframe, and you're like, wow. So if it doesn't stand out, then it's like you did a good job. So it's like you don't get the praise, but it's like a silent victory. You did good, but no one's gonna acknowledge it.
Yeah. You know what? Like David Lam said, it is a skill set. I mean, when Richard Lico and myself, we talk, or even like yesterday at E3 was talking with Colin and Christian Zanzuk. I'm sorry if I butcher your name, Christian. He's the animation director at Ubisoft for Splinter Cell Blacklist. And we're talking about motion capture, and that's why we have, Brent George is going to be giving a class who directed some of the stuff, Batman from Warner Brothers Montreal. So it's a hard skill set, and David, you've been doing it for a while, keyframing and motion capture and matching it. How long did it take you to like really master it?
I wouldn't say I mastered it.
Well,
comfortable. As any animator that was just keyframe, when I first took on this sort of mocap experience, like, it was definitely hard. Like, I was resisting it. I was thinking of blowing away stuff because I wanted to keyframe it. But I realized there's a lot going on, especially like I think the first instance was when I was working with Elena in Uncharted 2, and she was mocapped, and she was simply walking up to like a door, and I was like, wow, there's all the subtleties in her weight shift, in her hips and so forth. It's not this clean animation you would think. I'm looking at curves and animation curves, not her body curves, but her animation curves. It's like, wow, I can never do this in real life. Like, how is she, like, I can't capture this. There's no way unless I reference and just spend a crap load of time. And I think that was my breaking point. Like, this is a great tool set. And the more you work with it, the more you just sort of, you're not really thinking about it, but you're like picking up all these nuances very implicitly, like behind the scene. Like, you're just picking up things, but you're not really, you're not going to say, oh, that's a good thing. It's just things that you pick up and along the way. Like, after like a year or two, you're like I'm starting to animate differently, and I started changing the way I keyframe. Curves are never that clean when you're doing realistic stuff. There's a lot of interrupted moments. You're not just easing into a gesture or whatnot. There's a lot of like step fashion type motions where, if you turn your body, it's not like a clean Y turn or twist. There's a lot of weight shift and a lot of dirt, like not dirty, but a lot of inconsistencies in that turn. It's not a clean turn.
Yeah.
So simple things like that really help me understand, like, and I can't like say enough about that experience. You don't really think about how much it's helping you as an animator.
Yeah, that's what Brent George, our new instructor, and Richard Lico, like, they really attribute a lot to motion capture, to opening their eyes to a lot of detail in our body mechanics. And I think it's, when I look at it, I think it's a fantastic tool. You just need to know when to use it and how to use it. So.
Yeah, and to be honest, like, it saves and like when Larry got scared, it's like we might do like a walk cycle 10 times, or like even a simple turn like 10 times. And to be honest, like if you didn't have mocap and you're keyframing a turn 10 times, it gets kind of frustrating. So as a tool set, if you have mocap in place, it helps fill those kind of moments, like transitions or anything that's very subtle. Like we don't want to be keyframing that every time.
Gotcha.
It'll give you time to work on cooler moments if you can think about it that way.
It's kind of funny you mentioned that just even the smoothness of the curves. I was actually talking with Jason Ryan in regards to feature stuff, and he was talking about that very same thing, that we have to get kind of away from this ultra smooth curves and stuff like that. He goes, because it looks CG then, Yeah. And so it just, whether using mocap or just doing it for cinematics or feature, it's still that same concept that you're trying to get across, where this feels a little more believable, I guess.
Yeah, I think How to Train Your Dragon was really cool. Like the human animation was kind of, they were going away from that clean. I mean, I'm sure other people have done it, but that's the one movie that really sticks out in my head.
Yeah. Anything else you want to talk about on this before we close out, or anything you want to plug? You got a website that you keep up to date, or Twitter, or?
Yeah, well, the game is coming out today, so if you guys, if you guys are gamers or interested, The Last of Us is basically, it's a action adventure horror survivor game. So it's something out of norm. Like we trying to blend these two elements, and in a nutshell, it's this post-apocalyptic game where it's this modern plague or infection that's really decimated mankind. So people are surviving, and there's people that turn infected, and essentially they're kind of like zombies. We don't call them zombies. They're still human form. They still move and react the same way, but they're more killers. They want to infect you. So society as a whole has kind of turned into this chaotic world where you have military confines and quarantine zones. So it's very much the I Am Legend and sort of Children of Men kind of game, if I had to sum it up. And it centers around a father-daughter relationship between two strangers who have to sort of make their way across the United States and survive. And just to be to warn people, it's a mature audience game, but one thing that we do well, and I think it hits a chord, is it's a very emotional game. It's pretty impactful in that sense, and it's pretty violent. And it's funny, like when we play this game and hearing from other people, like it's violent, but it's justified because the game makes you feel very immersed. You feel like you're Joel, and you really care about Ellie. And I don't want to spoil anything in what happens, but you feel like Joel. So it's either you kill someone or you get killed. And the realism is that you have to kill this guy, and it's a nasty kill. You could even be, I don't know, I don't want to give away stuff, but it gets pretty brutal, and it's justified. So I think that's what's different. If you're playing as a third party, it may look brutal, but when you're playing it and you're feeling like you're Joel, it's very justifiable. You feel like I need to survive. So, and at some point, it's the survival, not for mankind, but it's the survival between you and Ellie. Then you help each other out. So that's the relationship that builds. That's a huge plus.
Well, we do again appreciate your time, David. This has been a very cool talk. I love doing these here. I don't know if it was our last one, I think, with JP Ryan Miller. He was talking about, thanks for doing the podcast and stuff. And he goes, I know they're a lot of work. I said, yeah, but these have been really cool just getting to talk with some of you guys here. So, again, a big shout out to you and really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks
Awesome,
a lot,
guys.
David, for taking the time, and congratulations to you and the whole team at Naughty Dog, and all the awards you guys have been winning. It's pretty impressive.
Hopefully those awards equal success, equal sales. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for your time. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Take care.
Awesome.
We're out.